Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. It's the Trusted Leader Show. I'm David Horsager, and I'm joined by a special guest who is also a very close friend. We've been...
Woo!
Yes.
Love that.
Jason Dorsey, welcome.
Thank you, David. Really a pleasure to get to be with you and have this conversation and share all these great new insights with your fans, followers, platform, and everybody else who's interested in trusted leadership, because that is important. So thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. Many people know, they may not know, but he's been on the Today Show. He's been on 60 Minutes. He is the foremost expert in generations, and he's president of the Center of Generational Kinetics. And he's a brilliant leader, brilliant entrepreneur and business leader. He's a board member. He's on, just advising some of the top leaders in the world. And I'm grateful to call you friend, Jason. So let's get going.
Yeah, glad to be here with you. All that stuff is generally true, so thank you for sharing that.
There we go. So, let's jump right in, because the new book is called Z Economy, and, you're an expert on generations. You've been talking about this for decades, but this new generation, I think people are kind of like, what really is that? What's that mean? Is that Gen Z? Is it this? Is it that? Tell us about, how does Gen Z play into, how do we lead them? Who are they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's probably helpful to maybe take a step back and share how we think about generations, and then we can jump into Gen Z, because I think that'll get everybody on the same page. So when we think about generations, a concept, we're a research firm, and we specifically do behavioral research at CGK. Our company's called the Center for Generational Kinetics. And when we think about Gen Z, or outside the US, we call them Gen Z, we're really focused on understanding sort of who they are, what makes them similar, what makes them different, what technologies do they use, how do they look for a job, what do they look for an employer, how do they think about money and retirement and marriage and all these different types of things. And so in our work, what I think is most important is we've uncovered through data, we've led more than 65 studies, that much of what is said about generations is just not true. And you and I have both lived that, right? I'm a millennial, and people say, oh, millennials are entitled, their pants are falling off, they don't show up for work, they're terrible leaders. And then we look at the data, and it turns out more millennials are working than anyone else in the United States, and they're more millennial managers. Or you say, well, Gen X, you're in Gen X. Can Gen X be loyal? And what our research shows is they're incredibly loyal and very good at making decisions and leading. And so what we've uncovered is that every generation brings something really important and valuable. And that's particularly true with Gen Z, who is very misunderstood. And that's why we wrote the new Z Economy book. Thank you for mentioning that. We were thrilled. It was a #1 new release on Amazon and a top 10 business book on Forbes. So we're super excited to have that out. So when we think about Gen Z, the first thing to sort of think about is, when were they born? That helps us to have a little bit of a mental framework to know when they start and stop. So based on our research, Gen Z is born starting around 1996. And for your listeners who are based in the US, where that comes from is they do not remember 9/11. And that was one of our most famous discoveries early on, is that how do we know when millennials end and Gen Z begins? Sometimes there's a generation defining moment. You remember it. It creates fear of the unknown, uncertainty, emotion, all these things. For me on 9/11, I remember I was in Los Angeles. I was there with my dad. I was totally freaking out. My dad was completely stone-faced, didn't, share any emotion, even though we're watching the same television. And about 30 minutes later, my grandfather called. He was about 80 years old then. And he said, J-Boy, it's going to be okay. I've been through this before. We got through it. We'll get through it again. It's going to be okay. I promise. And so he was watching 9/11, and he was thinking about World War II. And for him, it was Pearl Harbor. My dad, years later, told me he was thinking about the Vietnam draft, and he thought I was about to get drafted. That's why he had no emotion. I had no context for this, so I'm just freaking out because, my family's from New York, and I went to school there and all this. Gen Z, and this is really key, does not remember 9/11. It's not a contemporary event for them. It'd be like asking you or me to talk about the JFK assassination. We weren't there. We don't know. We can watch it on YouTube, but it's not the same because you don't have that fear of the unknown. So that's what helps us to understand, when does Gen Z start? And then you get to the, well, when does Gen Z end, right? It's like, what are the bookends? And what we believe to be true is that Gen Z ends around 2015. And the reason is we believe the capstone event is now COVID-19, this pandemic. And so as we think about COVID-19 and how it's impacting the generation, this is their where were you when moment. Because remember, they're now right at that formative stage. They're in middle school or elementary, or they're in college, university, or they're in the workforce. And all of a sudden, everything they've known has been upended. They had to come back home. If they had left the house, maybe they can't leave. All of these things have suddenly changed. The job that they were going to do, that industry no longer has any jobs. There's so much here. And then you add the social and emotional of homeschool and remote school and just on and on, dating, and you can't go to work, like all of this stuff put together. This is the 9/11 for Gen Z, but even more so because it's extended over such a long period of time. So as we think about that, the oldest members of Gen Z are roughly around 25 years old. What do we know about them? Sort of directly to your question. We know they're the most diverse generation in United States history, more diverse than any previous generation. And that's a huge part of who they are. What our research shows us is they're much more tied to social causes when we think about employers. We just did our new State of Gen Z study on this. And the social causes that Gen Z really aligns with are incredibly important. They look for that before they apply. They look for that after they apply, whether or not they're deciding to accept a job. And now they even look at whether or not they're going to stay with an employer based on the social causes that the employer selects. So for example, in the last 4 years, we've tracked social causes for employers when it comes to leadership. What Gen Z most wanted was to know that a company was combating climate change. That was the big sort of rally cry of the generation. But what we've seen now is that their biggest by far rally cry, what gets them fired up is social justice and really trying to make some change there. So they're looking for that in employers. That's changed over the last year. What we also know with Gen Z is they don't remember a time before the smartphone. Well, that changes everything when you think to your area of expertise around leadership and communication, even trust, which you're the world expert on. Like all of those things changed when your preferred method of communicating and engaging with the world is a small screen and that's all you've ever known. Well, that affects everything, right? From banking to onboarding. So as we think about the generation, they have a different relationship with technology. Like right now, what we're tracking is they want onboarding by text message. Well, many companies aren't set up to do that. They're not set up to have communication that way. What we're also seeing with the generation, and this is sort of the last one I'll leave you with before we jump into your next question, is that Gen Z is very frugal with their money. And this is probably the most shocking for many people. Because when you think about the 19 or 22-year-old or 15-year-old, you think, oh, well, they're out there just sort of blowing their money, whatever they earn, they're spending it. And it's completely the opposite. This generation was shaped through the Great Recession, and now they've seen the economic impact of COVID. And as a result of that, what our research shows consistently, and we do so many of these studies, is that Gen Z is much more conservative or practical with their money. In fact, so important for all your leaders listening, when Gen Z is considering an employer, they want to know the employer is stable. Well, that's a big difference than a typical teenager or early 20-something. They want to know that an employer is going to offer them benefits. What 19-year-old said, well, what are your benefits? Well, now that's a common thing. They want to know that there's retirement matching. These are all things we proved out in our studies and go into detail in the book. But the key here is what they're looking for doesn't match their life stage, but it actually does if you experience the events that they experience. So they're a very different generation. And the key is they're not millennials 2.0. And what I think is so important about this conversation for the type of work you do is many of the leaders who follow you and learn from you and trust you as they develop their own leadership skills, they were caught flat-footed around millennials. Millennials, they thought would grow out of it. They didn't, create all kinds of change. And now people are catching up and certainly trying to navigate that. The flip side is leaders are now going, well, we don't want that to happen again. So what do we need to know about Gen Z? And that's really exciting because we think this generation brings so much to the workforce, just like every generation does. And this is a really critical time because right now, Gen Z is the fastest growing generation on a percentage basis. And they're the most consistent generation around the world. So when we look at it, fastest growing generation in the workforce on a percentage basis, and the most consistent, not exactly the same, but most consistent around the world. So getting Gen Z right creates tremendous opportunity for leaders today.
So with those opportunities, we've got them there, the social causes, technology, frugal. It's kind of easy to say, okay, everybody, every leader, now you have to give the best benefit plan, give. But what can we do? Like, what are the opportunities? How do we motivate? How do we create a place where every generation and Gen Z can be their best?
Yeah, and the way you sort of asterisk that question, I think is really the secret. It's not about catering to any one generation. I speak for clients all over the world now that you and I both live in this virtual presentation, and everybody wants to know, how do we adapt to Gen Z or how do we adapt to millennials or whomever? And it's important that we think about adapting to them, but we have to do it in the context of not turning off the other generations. because we still need all of them. They're all incredibly important. So when we think about strategies and tactics, it's what are the things that you can add or do differently, generally that are low cost or no cost, that not only bring out the best of Gen Z, but also the other generations go, wow, this is pretty great. I want that too. So as an example, that text message onboarding, it turns out that lots of generations like the idea that they can go through that whole process from their mobile device, wherever they are at any time. Nobody would have guessed that, but it turns out trends right now, generational trends start with the youngest and are rippling up to the oldest. It's one of our big discoveries. So when we think about what you can do with Gen Z now, these are all things that we see work with other generations too. The first, when it comes to building trust and engagement and alignment, we find that frequency of communication is very important. Now, I want to caveat this because there are certain people that are listening right now that just rolled their eyes and said, oh, great, now we got to baby these people, like whatever. That is absolutely not the case. What we actually see is the opposite. It's frequency of information, not amount of information. This is not a 2-hour annual review, right? Nobody wants that. What we find with Gen Z is they want quick hit feedback. That could be 10, 15, 20 seconds a week. Think of it like a text message or a message on Slack or an instant message or a quick video you film. What we find is the frequency is important, particularly in the time of this pandemic in a hybrid work environment. If they don't feel you're talking to them, then they think they're going to lose their job. And this is really key. Other generations, they didn't think that way. They thought, hey, if my boss isn't talking to me, we're all good. But Gen Z thinks the opposite, which is if I'm not hearing from my boss, I'm probably going to get fired. And that's an important distinction to make and then be able to think about that frequency that scales. One message to all of them works just as well as a message one-on-one. So the key here is frequency is very, very important for them feeling engaged. The second thing that we hear, which again ties into your pillars that you do so well, is Gen Z wants to be heard. Now, interestingly, it's not that Gen Z expects you to do what they say. Now, this is a key distinction. It's not that they think that they show up and they have all the answers. That's not true. In fact, we see the opposite with Gen Z. But Gen Z wants to engage in the conversation, be heard, and be a part of that. Now, again, you can use technology to do that. You can do morning huddles. You can just make it safe and easy for them to ask a question. But Gen Z is entering the workforce at an older age than any previous generation in the workforce today. So they may be 19 or 20, but they may have no experience. So they're going to have questions. They want to make sure they know who to ask. They want to know that they can be heard. So making it easy for them to do an outreach that's safe and get a question so they can stay focused works like magic. Again, everything I just shared costs zero. One of my favorite ones, though, is right now we're seeing with Gen Z is to provide specific examples of the performance that you expect. And this is where, in your line of work, sort of trust and communication really come together. And I see this all the time because you know me, I work with all these executives. I serve on lots of corporate boards. I'm really passionate about helping senior execs create the right culture and then making sure that culture is represented from the bottom up rather than just the top down, which is what people try to do. And then it doesn't necessarily work. We want to make sure that people are on board. And one of the things we find is that communication varies in interpretation by generation. So if I said to somebody, okay, make sure you show up for our meeting on time, well, that can mean something very different based on generation, even though the person who said it was super clear. Or Jason, make sure you deliver great customer service. Well, if you're in one generation, great customer service might be chat. It might be a text message with an emoji. And somebody else says, well, pick up the phone and call me, or we need to meet face-to-face, socially distanced. So what we find is with Gen Z is you create videos of the examples of what you want. So if you want customer service to look a certain way, make a 15-second video. There's tons of different programs that can do that right now that will enable you to message that out. Now, before, again, people roll their eyes and go, gosh, Jason, now we got to coddle these people. That is totally bunk. What I'm saying is, when you talk with a different generation and you say something you think is really clear to you, they're putting it through a filter, and what comes out the other side may not be what you want, particularly true right now in a hybrid environment. And as a result, both of you are disappointed. So what do? You make a video, you make it one time, it saves you hours and hours and tons of times. They learn faster. And here's the key that leaders want. You can then hold them accountable because you've shown them what success looks like. And that's magic. Right? I mean, it's such a big deal to give people a roadmap for success so they can then make sure and deliver on that. And then sort of the last piece, which is really into the weeds, but I know you're into details, which I love, is that we're finding that Gen Z is coming of age expecting faster access to the money they earn. This is one of those that I think is going to ripple up to the other generations again. So it's called earned wage access. We talk about this a lot in the Z Economy book. Gen Z is going to come of age having always been able to have access to the money they earned every day. There's all these different services that do it. We talk about in the book. And so if your first job is working at a restaurant or in retail or anywhere, maybe you're doing some gig economy job, You finish that day, you get a message and it says, Jason, I saw you earn $54.12 today. Would you like half your money, yes or no? And you click yes, the money shows up instantly in your account with no fees. All of a sudden, you've only known the ability to get paid every day when you need it. And I think that's a big systemic shift that has huge implications across all the other generations. Because what we find in our research is other generations go, well, I'd like that too, and I need it. That sounds great. There's no downside. There's no cost. Why am I waiting 2 weeks? So it's these sorts of things that Gen Z will only know and then bring into the workforce and infuse themselves, which is incredibly exciting if you're a generational researcher like we are.
Hey, it's Ann with the Trust Edge team here. As you know, we are passionate about helping you and your team perform at your best. And that's why David wrote his new book, Trusted Leader. This true-to-life parable follows the story of a CEO who uncovers the root issue threatening his organization's success. And in the back half of the book, David provides a roadmap for even how to solve those root issues. Get Trusted Leader for your team, your organization, or even just for yourself at trustedleaderbook.com.
So there's two things I'm thinking about right now. You said something a little bit ago, about culture, and we talk a whole lot about driving high-performing cultures on trust. And in essence, a lot of what you're doing is that. So how you said something about differentiating between top-down and bottom-up. How do you do it differently to create culture from the bottom and the top?
So what we find is that when we work with senior execs, and that's typically who I'm working with, is getting them to sort of bring to life the culture. For some of them, it's really easy. For lots of them, it's really hard. Maybe the culture was established before they got there. Maybe somebody picked whatever the statement was. Like there's something there that seems to be a little bit of a divide or a disconnect between who they are and how they're leading and what the company is viewed at in terms of culture, that sort of DNA. So we work with them to really get clear on that process. Now, you're much better at that than I am. I'm just bringing a generational lens to it. But once we get them to get clear on what that is, right, that sort of culture piece and work, the trick then becomes, how do you message it in a way that other generations all the way down to the front lines absolutely believe? That is sort of the secret. That's the magic. And that's what we're really good at, because it's the messaging. If you want to think about it, it's like a filter where we're trying to help a message. We know we want the message to be, but we know different generations are going to hear it differently. Even, by the way, geographies, genders, we go through a whole bunch of different things that we study. So one of the ways, for example.
Give us a quick example, like just something quick, like this generation takes it like this like this like this, because we've got all these generations in the workplace. What would be an example so we understand it?
Yeah, so an example might be, our culture is all about professionalism. Well, what in the world does that mean? This is the sort of thing I hear all the time, right? So if you take professionalism and you give 2 or 3 examples that each generation will understand, then all of a sudden they go, I got it, right? Or if you write it in a way that doesn't sound fake, that's better. But what we like to do is we like to get them to put it into video, because what we know is video is the number one way to educate Gen Z. Also, by the way, true with millennials. So putting it in a written word and posting it somewhere, making it your backdrop, or whatever, that doesn't work. They want to see the video, they want to see it come to life, and they want to see it embodied. And so when we go all the way down to the front lines, what we find out is this, and this is really key for our type of culture work, which is when you go to the front lines, the most important and influential person of culture is what we call the local leader. And that is the person that the front lines interact with on a weekly basis. And here's basically how it looks. A simple example. You probably saw all these executives say during this time of COVID, we're all in this together. And if you're a follower of our work, which I know you are, I came out really hard against that and said, that is totally not true. People say that, it's well-intentioned, they mean well. But our research shows conclusively, look, we've done all these studies, it's all for free on our website, that every generation is having a different experience in the time of COVID. At the same time, geographies are different, socioeconomics are different. I mean, we go through a whole list. So yes, we're all experiencing this at the same time, but the experience is very different. So then the executives go and they message out, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We got you covered. Well, the first thing that local leader has to do is they have to make sure that they truly believe and repeat what the executive just said, because this is what we know happens. And we see it all the time in our work. The people on the front lines go to their boss and say, I saw what, Bob or Sally or, whoever said in their video they sent out to everybody. Is it true? And that is the moment where the culture becomes real on the front lines. If those frontline managers do not echo it, it's not believed, it doesn't stick, it's just a talking head, and we might as well just move on. And so for me, the greatest way to test a culture is to talk to the frontline leaders and see if they are the backstop for what they believe to be true around that culture. That's what makes all the difference in the world.
Let's take a little pivot here because I think you would have some experience with this, even though it's not so much a generational issue, but it surely is a today issue. And that is, we're talking about accountability and leadership of all these different generations. A big challenge today is remote and virtual. How do we create accountability? How do we create healthy culture? And how do we do some of these things? In our case, how do we build trust virtually?
Yeah, we've done a number of studies on this. We have lots of clients because our sort of retainer work is exactly addressing this. And so I think it's worth sharing that 99% of all companies were not prepared to end up in a remote or hybrid world. So anybody listening who's going, yes, I totally get it, you're not alone. This is a completely normal, this is an experience that companies all sizes, all levels are having. Now they have different levels of resources, different geographic breakdowns, certain things like that. And frankly, in some of our clients, they're not really experiencing this as much. If you work in a restaurant, you're still showing up. If you're a retail grocer, you're still showing up. There's elements that have become hybrid. But for many companies, this was now a fully remote or at least mostly remote experience. Well, what do we know drives, in your case, trust, but also in our case, alignment and performance and accountability. And I think the trick with accountability is accountability has a bad reputation because often managers and leaders use it as a gotcha, right? It's punitive. Ha, I caught you. And when you come at it from that standpoint versus we all have a role to play in order to be successful, you automatically put people on the defensive and they go, whoa, I don't want accountability, because what drives accountability? What's the core? Transparency. If you don't have transparency, you don't have accountability. So now what we've seen is this big, wide swath of, I want to know everything you're doing. There's technology out there right now today that takes pictures of employees every 30 seconds or every minute or whatever. And that's supposed to, build trust and create transparency. And they say, hey, we know you're picking your nose. It's okay. We all pick our nose. We all want a photo of that. There's that. There's the other extreme, which is, we just trust you to get it done. We don't care how you did it other than the fact that you did it based on the requirements we have. We trust you and you're going to deliver it to us. Now, the problem is somewhere in the middle, right? And so what we see is daily huddles and daily check-ins are incredibly important, primarily with small groups. There's this idea that we need to have these daily check-ins or meetings with large groups. Once you get above about 20, people can slide into the background. I would even argue 10. But so the idea there is, whatever you do on your daily group to kick that off, like in our case at our company here, we do one every morning. It's from 8:30 to 8:35 a.m. And during that period of time, we all get aligned. We all know what we're going to do. We let people know, in our case, the one thing we're going to absolutely get done today. And then they do another one later in the day that I'm not even a part of because it's a smaller group. And so the idea here is, how do we create that cadence of alignment and credibility so accountability isn't a gotcha? And part of that is you have to let people raise their hand if they're stuck on the way. And that's important, especially in a hybrid. Nobody wants to be like, oh, I'm the weak link. So then what happens? They don't raise their hand. All of a sudden you miss a deadline and you had no insight into it. So you want to make it safe for people to ask for help, not for them to do your job for you, but for them to be able to ask for help and say, hey, I'm stuck here. Can you take something off me so I can really work on this today? So making it safe to raise their hand. And then I think you have to have spacing of those goals in such a way that people know they're still aligned. So in most cases, that's a weekly goal or biweekly. I think monthly is way too long. People can get lost in the weeds, they can get sidetracked and so forth. And then, of course, those should flow up to wherever they need to go. But the key thing here, when we think about that accountability piece, is you don't want people to feel like they're on an island and you're just trying to catch them doing something wrong. It absolutely crushes culture. It crushes performance. But you don't want to micromanage. So you want to make it safe for them to do their check-ins, let you know that they're aligned. And then if you use things like Slack, there's tons of these different workforce collaboration. There's ways to do this that's also via tech. We just did a big study that looked at workforce collaboration in the US, Europe, and other countries. And what we found is, and this I think is really important, people didn't need the latest technology. This is very important. They did not need the latest technology. In fact, they didn't even want it. They just wanted enough technology to be effective. And I think you have people out there all around the world right now going, how am I more effective in terms of being able to deliver results? Give me at least the minimum technology I need to be successful. Help me to create alignment. Let me raise my hand as I go. And if something's not working, let me be able to take some time to fix it or raise that and say, hey, can you help me? So I think hybrid absolutely works. And we've proven that now. There's tons of companies. In fact, many companies I work with, like Jason, we may never go back. And so there's a whole hot debate there we could spend an hour on. But fundamentally, the idea is that we've got to make hybrid work. And I think the way that people come at it, and you and I have talked about this before, a lot of people come at this and they go, this is terrible, or it's uncomfortable, or I don't like it, or people are in their pajamas or whatever. But the reality is, I like the other approach, which is how do we make this the best work experience while this is the experience we're having? Do we change it in a year if people go back to it? Sure. That's what works for you. But instead of approaching this as it's terrible or it's, all these things, or I don't like it because I don't like to be on video, like just go the opposite. How do we make this as amazing as possible so our employees are fired up, so I'm leading and delivering results in a way that everybody's comfortable with? And that means turn off the video, then turn off the video. But focus on the outcome with them, and you'll see that people really rise to the challenge in this hybrid time.
I love it. I love the idea. A friend of mine, CEO of a great med tech company, said, in the War College, he said something that's been helping him. He says that VUCA, when in the War College in the 1980s, they taught this, when you have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, or ambiguity, don't spend all your time on things you can't control, but think of what can I control, number one, and number two, what should I do first? And that's this time, what can you do? Hey, this is the environment we're in. Quit talking about when it's going to come back or this or that, but what can we do right now in this environment? And when you do that, there's a whole lot more than you thought at first, right?
Absolutely.
So,
and I want to say to that point, as you sort of learned from your friend there, is that, there's a perception out there that you got to be young to do well in this hybrid environment. That is totally, absolutely bunk. I work with baby boomers all the time who frankly are better at technology than I am. And if you've ever heard me speak at all these events, I always talk about boomers invented the technology, right? And so I think we have to step back from that sort of preconceived notion that you have to be a certain age to do well in this environment. Like, we're all learning in this period of time, and let's go in and let people shine and do their best. Whether you're 18 or 80, you can absolutely make it work. It's just choosing to and letting people, give them the space to be able to rise to that challenge. That I think is incredibly exciting.
Absolutely. It's the Trusted Leader Show, so we have a few quick lightning round questions for you. Before we get there, though, where can we find out more about you? We'll put all this in the show notes at trustedleadershow.com. We'll put it all there. Where can we find the book? Where can we find out about what you're doing at the Center for Generational Kinetics?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. For those interested in our research, we do put lots of it on our website for free. And so you can just go to genhq.com and click on State of Gen Z, and you can download the report, see all the different studies. We have multiple studies going, and you can get them all totally for free. We just want to separate myth from truth. If you want information about me speaking or the type of advisory or board work I do, you can go to my own website, which is jasondorsey.com, jasondorsey.com. And if you're interested in the book, it's called Zeconomy, How Gen Z Will Change the Future of Business and What to Do About It. Dave actually helped me with the book title, so shout out to Dave on that one.
I remember it.
Yep. That was an awesome day. And you can get it on Amazon or wherever you choose to buy your books or listen to them. And yes, I actually did the audiobook, so you can listen to that too, which was really fun and way harder than it sounds. So, and the big news is on that, I just want to share, I don't know if people could see the video, if they'll be able to, but behind me right here is our new copy from South Korea. We just got our first South Korean edition. We've got Ukraine coming out and Brazil and Turkey and several others. So it's been incredible to see how people have connected with the book and put it to use. So thanks for letting me share all those, Dave. I really appreciate it.
It's just a wealth of information. Your center is the absolute place to find the leading content and research and insights on generations, how they work together, how to motivate, inspire, and create really high trust cultures, and from a generational standpoint. So excited to have you on. We got some quick fire questions right here, a sentence or two each. Let's get started. We're going to get personal here first. You're a leader that I trust. You're a friend that I trust. But let's just take your leadership, because you've been leading a big team. You've led several companies. You're on several boards. You lead even in your home. So what kind of habits personally, habits or routines? You talk about, to lead others, you got to lead yourself. What's something you do to lead yourself?
I would say the best thing I do as a habit is I journal almost every day. And I find that taking that, in my case, happens to be about half an hour to reflect on the day, always gives me a sense of clarity and often realizations that I just don't get on, Zoom meetings all day and everything else. So that sort of touchstone for me is journaling. And I've done it since I was 18 years old when I wrote my first book. So it's
unbelievable how many great leaders have said that over the past several shows as the routine. It's just amazing. What's a favorite book or resource right now?
Candidly, I got an advanced copy of yours and I really loved it. So thanks for that, letting me read that. That was super inspiring. I would say outside of that, right now, I've just been reading a bunch of sort of perspective books. I'm reading The Alchemist for probably the 58th time. And I find every time I read it, I still get something new out of it. So yeah, I have a habit of rereading books I like because I find at different life stages, they bring something new. And that's certainly one of those that's done it for me.
And all that'll be in the show notes, and great advice. So what's something you're learning right now? Just life, personal, professional?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing I'm learning, which probably sounds really cheesy to others, but I think you may appreciate, I'm learning how to be home. And so for those not familiar with my speaking or work, I've traveled more than 200 days a year, often 250 or more, since I turned 19 years old and wrote my first book. And so a month into the pandemic, I had been home more in a calendar year than I had since I was 19. And my wife and I, we've been married now for almost 15 years. And we have a 9-year-old daughter named Raya, who's loved my life, and lots about her in the book. And so being home and learning how to be present at home with them is something I've really worked on. You know, Denise and I, my wife, have always had a really great relationship. Raya and I've really worked at that, and now it's just been magical. You know, I take her to school in the weeks that she goes in person, which is every other week, and then we have breakfast together, and I cook dinner, and just, you know, being present at home versus it being an event to be home has just been really magical for me. And it's taken a while, for everybody. But it has been the greatest gift that's come out of this sort of unintended consequence. And I love it. And now that we're doing all this retainer and advisory work where I get to stay home, I'm digging it. And I think I'm going to do a lot more of it going forward. So
that absolutely. Do you have a favorite app or gadget right now?
A favorite app or gadget? Well, I would say my favorite thing right now is I just got a new iPhone, and I absolutely love it. And I would say my favorite gadget, if it's not really a gadget, is iCloud. I just love the idea that we can do so much of our work in the cloud right now. And the more that I've embraced that and our team has, I feel that the higher performing we are, and we're able to just not just do things and have them filed away on a computer, but really, you know, be accessible and searchable. And I think for me, what's happened is it's enabled me to keep better track of learning as I go. And that's whether that's notes or some of these others. I find it really exciting to feel almost liberated from a physical device. And that's something that I've really embraced and loved. So yeah, really sort of leaning into that one because it does just change so many things.
Absolutely. So. Favorite piece of advice?
I think my favorite piece of advice, at least at least it's been my favorite piece of advice since I was 18, because that's when I used to assign it in the books, was that anything is possible if you believe in yourself. And I know that's certainly been something that I've had to live. You know, I started out, wrote my first book, slept on the floor for quite a long time. Nobody believed in me. In fact, I was disowned.
And homeless, right?
Well, I slept in it on the floor of a garage apartment and many couches along the way. But yeah, just trying to, not homeless in the sense of homeless, but, definitely started on the floor with me and a bunch of books and cut off. And it was the best thing that ever happened. But like any journey such as that, there's definitely those moments of doubt and all those sort of things. And going back to that, anything is possible if you believe in yourself. I remember dreaming about being on a TV show and ended up on the Today Show over and over again, or getting to travel outside the U.S. That was a big deal for me. And then getting to go speak in all these countries around the world, and, writing a book that was a bestseller, and then having a best-selling book, like all these sorts of things. I can still go back to those journal pages and really just believing in that, even when nobody else did. And I just think that has a powerful impact on people's lives. So.
One thing left for Jason Dorsey in this life. One thing left Jason wants to do.
For me, I would like to live with my wife outside the U.S. We really, not right now, of course, but at some point, Denise and I would really love to spend some time living abroad. We've traveled a lot internationally, as I know you have, and we really want to experience living somewhere outside the U.S. for a little while. And so we're excited to try that out when the time is right. I have no idea if that's in 10 years or whenever, but that's something we're really fired up to get to do.
Great. All these ideas, thoughts, and recommendations will be at trustedleadershow.com in the notes. It's the time for the last question. We ask it every time. This is the Trusted Leader Show. Who's a leader you trust and why?
Funny enough, I would say the leader I trust and why is Denise, my wife. And I know you made the joke about I lead at the house. I certainly try, but Denise is just shown her resilience and stability and integrity over and over and over again in all kinds of situations she's had to deal with in life. As you know, she was a teacher and then a principal in very difficult schools, and then worked in lots of nonprofits, and then founded a for-profit company, and then continues to grow. And I just really love the fact that she can bring a sense of calmness and certainty and inclusion, which I think is really powerful for leaders to do right now. And it's just, I don't have some of the skills that she has. I mean, she really has a very specific way of leading. In fact, she leads EO Austin right now. And this, as you can imagine, is a very difficult time to lead an organization like that meets in person when you can't. And just seeing how she navigates that is really an example to me of how I want to continue to grow as a leader. So she would be the one. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have a big one, but that's the one that had the biggest impact on my life.
So Jason is, he is the expert on generations, but he also is genuinely a dear friend. You will notice in the new book, Trusted Leader, that Jason is one of the very few people that the book is dedicated to, because I really do trust him. I'm grateful for you, Jason. I'm grateful for how you've made me better. And so I just want to thank you for sharing your insight and wisdom today. And thanks for being my friend.
Oh, wow. That's heavy what you just shared. Thank you for that. I'm very grateful. I had no idea that I was in your book. So thank you. And the dedication is, wow. Thank you, Dave. That means so much to me. So thank you. And I'm grateful for you and all that you've taught me. So thank you so much for living by example, everything that you talk about, which I think is very rare and a real gift to the world. So thanks for having me on today.
Thank you. With that, it's been the Trusted Leader Show. And until next time, stay trusted.